No, I'll do
Yes,
one more.
Michelle.
I'll do one more sweep for counselors in the waiting room. Okay, I don't see anyone yet. And is Carrie or Candace on the tech side here?
Good morning, Madam Chair. It's Carrie.
Okay, are we good to go on your end?
Ready to go when you are.
Great. Okay, I will Zoom gavel to order and dive in. Good morning, everyone. My name is Michelle Wu. I'm chair of the Boston City Council's Committee on Planning, Development, and Transportation. I will first read a series of required disclosures and summaries on the record, and then we will dive in. In accordance with Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, modifying certain requirements of the open meeting law and relieving public bodies of certain requirements, including the requirement that public bodies conduct their meetings in a public place that is open and physically accessible to the public, the City Council will be conducting this hearing virtually. This enables the Council to carry out our responsibilities while adhering to public health recommendations and ensuring public access to deliberations through adequate alternative means. The public may watch this meeting via live stream at boston.gov/city-council-tv or via broadcast on Xfinity 8, RCN 82, and FiOS 964. This public hearing is being recorded. Oh, we just said that part. It will also be rebroadcast at a later date on Xfinity 8, RCN 82, and FiOS 964. Anyone who would like to testify, please email juan.lopez@boston.gov for the Zoom link. So today's hearing is on docket number 0330, order for a hearing to discuss zoning and the community outreach process for life sciences laboratories in the city of Boston. This matter was sponsored by Councillor Ed Flynn and Councillor Michael Faherty and was referred to this committee on February 10th, 2021. And so let's go to the councillors first, the sponsors, for a quick opening statement. Then I know we have a member from the community and the industry who would like to make a comment before needing to jump off, and then we'll go into the administration panel. Sound good? So we'll start with Councillor Ed Flynn.
Thank you, Councillor Wu, for chairing this hearing, to Councillor Faherty for being my co-sponsor. I want to thank the panelists as well for being here. Recent decades, our city and state has become the hub of life sciences and biotechnology industry with incredible investment, innovation, and partnership among government, our world-class education and medical institutions in the private sector. As we witnessed over the course of the COVID-19 pandemic, it will take this combination of talent, innovation, and technology that we're fortunate to have in our backyard to confront our challenges. Our life sciences and biotech partners will continue to play a key role in the City of Boston's recovery and bright future. In my district alone, I probably have close to 25 proposals about life sciences. So I want to learn more from the BPDA. I want to learn more from the biotech community and residents about the community process. Long-term city planning must be at the forefront. Many of these proposals, my neighbors have reached out to me asking for the city to provide information about the impact life sciences have on our city. I received a call this morning from a prominent business leader who expressed to me the incredible role life sciences play in the Boston economy. I certainly agree. I also want to continue to work closely with residents in making sure their voices are heard as well as we go through the community process. Additionally, Councillor Baker, Councillor Bach, and Braden, and myself called for a hearing on workforce development as it relates to the life sciences and biotech industry. While we are thankful for the significant benefits that this industry has brought to our city and state, we want to make sure Boston residents, kids living in various neighborhoods, all of the neighborhoods of Boston, also are trained, educated, and have access to eventually these career paths. That's what's important to me as well, making sure kids in BPS learn about the STEM program, learn about biotech, life sciences. So I want to challenge the BPDA and the business community to work closely with residents to educate all of us, myself included, but to educate residents why life sciences are important, the critical role they play, but also making sure that voices of the residents are also heard at the BPDA, at the ZBA as well. We have an obligation to educate people across the city on the impact of life sciences, and that's what we're calling here for today in the community process. Again, looking forward to the hearing and looking forward to the testimony from some of the experts in this field as well. Thank you, Councilor Wu.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn, and to the co-sponsor, Councilor Michael Flaherty.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and obviously thanks to Councilor Flynn for his leadership here. And just to expand, obviously, and to add on to what Councilor Flynn had said, we are grateful for the life science industry, for the commitment to our city. As I've often said, we boast of having the best colleges and universities, hospitals, and network of community health centers in the world. And so it's no surprise that that life sciences have chosen Boston. It's a livable, walkable, and relatively safe city compared to other cities our size or bigger. And so we get a lot of natural strengths that makes Boston a popular destination, and particularly its brain power. And so I appreciate the industry and the representatives from the industry that's here. Just to expand on some of the challenges that we're facing as we continue to become a bigger hub for life sciences and for labs. It presents us with enormous opportunities, but also challenges. And it's critical that as the demand for life science and lab use continues to grow, particularly as it encroaches closer to our residential communities, it's important that our planning agency, develop planning guidelines and policies around, community concerns. The big one, and we need to all find a way to solve it, is the mechanicals. How can we tuck the mechanicals into the building? You have someone will purchase a building, maybe a commercial space, and then they're looking to add mechanicals. In some instances, I've seen them 37, 40 feet in height. So that's one big hurdle that we need to satisfy right out of the gate. In addition to what Council Flynn had alluded to in terms of the education piece, that whether it's the information or there's a lot of misinformation out there in terms of what's being tested, what's not being tested, if anything's being tested at all within these lab space. So we appreciate the opportunity. We appreciate the commitment that again, in opportunities that life science and labs present. We obviously want to make sure that there's a benefit to the people who live in the community and that benefit trickles throughout all of Boston's neighborhoods. But these are some of the challenges that we're seeing as elected leaders when you go out to a community group and or you're listening to the direct abutters. They'll be looking at a footprint of a building. We had one recently. And then the person will ask a question and say, well, what is that? And they point up and, oh, that's a great question, sir. Those are the mechanicals. Well, how big are those? Well, that's another great question. They're 37 feet. So if life science and labs can solve that problem, they will eliminate a huge headache in the neighborhoods with respect to the mechanicals on top of the building. And I would argue that and through a planning process and working with the BRA, doing business as the BPDA, that they find a way to incorporate the mechanicals into the guts, into the bones of the building. That would eliminate a significant amount of opposition right out of the gate from direct abutters that are looking at a building only to know that they're going to now be having to look up at these hulking mechanicals. And so, again, these are the details I think we can dive into, but I want to be very clear that we appreciate the opportunity that this presents our city, particularly as we're coming out of a pandemic. We are well poised as a city in conjunction with the federal COVID relief funds to move our city even further. And I know that life sciences and labs will add tremendous value there. I just want to make sure that we're sensitive to the communities, the surrounding communities, particularly the neighborhoods, as we continue to see lab opportunities getting closer and encroaching on the neighborhoods, that we do have appropriate guidelines that respect their quality of life, but that the direct abutters have input. And I get to tell you from experience, right out of the gate, the big one is the mechanicals. And then the second one is, well, what's being tested? What level is it? Stuff like that. So I think an education piece would serve life science and lab community well as the neighborhood. So that's it for me. Look forward to the hearing. I appreciate everyone's participation. And again, I appreciate the industry and the representatives that are here. We value and respect their value add in the sheer number of people that you guys are putting to work And hopefully that will trickle out to our neighborhoods, and that we will have a school system that will adjust, and we will have a curriculum. Finally, the Boston Public Schools have a curriculum that mirrors the demands that the local economy is presenting, and that workforce and your future workforce will come from our Boston Public Schools and the neighborhoods of Boston. And until we focus on that, and that's our job, obviously, as City Council, is working with the administration and the school department to make sure that we have a curriculum, that we have more focus on STEM and things like that, and that it's real, and that there are real connections and there are real partnerships with your industry and our Boston Public Schools. So those are the things I'm going to continue to keep a close eye on and push for. And our hope is that working together, we can iron out some of these issues that sort of pop up at the community level. But I think they're solvable problems. Putting mechanicals into the guts of a building, I got to think that there's someone smarter than all of us in the engineering and architectural world that can find a way to sink them into the building so that they're not, hulking on top of the building, casting shadows and compressors noise to direct abutters. I mean, they're solvable problems, and I'm here to roll up the sleeves to work with you guys to try to get to yes on this stuff. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Flaherty. And again, to both of the lead sponsors. Councillor Braden has joined us as well. Welcome, Councillor. And would you like to give a brief opening statement?
Thank you. Sorry, I'm a few minutes late. I really welcome this discussion this morning. Alston Brighton is another neighbourhood that's seeing a lot of development of labs, and I just want to hear what folks are thinking about zoning and how we integrate a lab facility into close to a residential neighbourhood, which is a big concern. So I look forward to the conversation. Thank you, and thank you to the lead sponsors.
Thank you. So let's dive right in. The administration panel has graciously agreed to accommodate one pre-submitted notification that there was a hard stop from Peter from Mass Econ. So we appreciate your making the time for us. I know you have a few minutes. So could you please introduce yourself and give some remarks? And if we have time, we can entertain some questions, and then we'll go back to the administration panel.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Appreciate the time that the committee is putting into this. My name is Pete Aber. I'm Executive Director of Mass Econ. Mass Econ is a statewide economic development nonprofit. Our mission as an organization is to help champion Massachusetts as the best place for companies to locate and grow in a fashion that's equitable in every community across the entire state. I have a background in the life sciences. A number of years I spent at Mass Bio. Back in 2010, I was the editor of a publication called The Community Guide for Biotechnology, which was a great learning experience for me, and probably will echo among folks that are on in this meeting today. What I discovered at that time, and which is truly the case, is life sciences and biotechnology research specifically is extremely regulated, a very high level of regulation at the federal level, whether it's the Food and Drug Administration, the EPA, Department of Agriculture, at the state level, the Department of Environmental Protection, and at the local level, especially here in Massachusetts and especially in the city of Boston. And in putting together the Community Guide to Biotechnology back in 2010, really one of the city we looked to, among some others in Massachusetts, really was the city of Boston for the regulations it already had in the books with regard to research in recombinant DNA, laboratory space, in terms of biosafety regulations. Boston has been a model, and really it should be a source of pride for Boston that among major cities in the United States, it was the first to establish these types of regulations. And because it did, and because Massachusetts in general was in the forefront of regulating this industry on a municipal basis and providing municipal oversight, it really sent a great signal to the industry that here is a sophisticated city in which we know what we need to do in order to establish these types of research spaces. And so Boston really set a very high bar and led the way. in nationally in terms of this kind of regulation. All those regulations now rest with the Boston Public Health Commission, has its Office of Biosafety, incredible experts there right within City Hall with regard to the regulation of the industry. And when we say the industry, it's not just private employers, it's just not companies, it is research hospitals that do this type of research. It's research universities in Boston that do this type of research. They are under the same sort of purview of these regulations at the municipal level. And so these regulations go back to the 1980s. They've been constantly updated. And most recently, 2006, the biosafety regulations were established also in the city of Boston. So the regulations are based on something called the National Institutes of Health guidelines on rDNA research. And these are institutional standards used by those in research in terms of good lab practices to protect primarily those that are working in the labs from harm. And so well-established regulations and regulations that are well-established in the city of Boston. Sort of the centerpiece of all that is the establishment of institutional biosafety boards, which organizations that are operating research in rDNA need to establish. There needs to be community representation on these biosafety boards, and there is annual reporting to the city of Boston through the Public Health Commission. So very well-established rules in terms of safety, in terms of what's going on in these labs. So that's on the safety side. I'll just mention just with regard to special requirements for these types of facilities. There are special requirements, in terms of air handling, and that varies depending on what you're doing within these spaces in terms of water treatment, water coming in to the lab, water going out of the lab. There are a lot of different levels of treatment that takes place to make sure that nothing that goes back into the water system is harmful to the community. Waste removal, all of these things are highly regulated, and they're regulated. And those in the industry appreciate these regulations because they, again, and why Boston has been such a centerpiece for the industry, because the industry knows these are things we need to do. There's a sophistication level in Boston to understand this industry, and that's why it's attractive to them, because it's a highly regulated industry, and for funders who are, for companies that receive funding from investors, they need to show their records in terms of what they're doing within these labs, and all these regulations help enforce that and help them convey to potential funders and investors that they're doing what they need to do. And that's the same thing at the research university level, same thing at the research hospital level. They have to show the same kind of accountability in terms of what's going on in their lab space. So these are expensive facilities, and ballpark to create a lab in that's doing biotechnology research. We're talking $700-800 or more per square foot in terms of establishing this type of space. So it's not something that can be done in any kind of building. It requires a big investment to make these systems work as they should. And there are very experienced developers and construction firms that work almost specifically just with this industry. And so for those developers that have a broad, lengthy experience with the industry, they know how to do it. There are more developers that are interested in getting into the space, but there would not be a company that would go into space that did not meet their very exacting specifications in terms of what they were going to do. And so very robust systems need to be in place. So it's not for the faint of heart in terms of developing this type of space. It requires a lot of expertise. And as we look around Boston, there are a lot of these facilities, of course, already in place, and many are very unobtrusive because they have built out the space in the proper fashion. So those are just some thoughts from Mass Econ and from my experience with the industry. Happy to take any questions, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you. As mentioned, we'll do this one just a little bit differently. Everyone else will go all in a batch because of time constraints. Any questions for Pete?
None for me, Council Wu.
None for me.
Same here.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Pete, for your time. And we'll proceed now to the administration. I see representatives from BPDA, ISD, and the Boston Public Health Commission here. So I will leave to you all whatever order feels to fit. If you could just please make sure you introduce yourself before diving into your opening statement, and then feel free to pass it on.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Wu, Council Flynn, and Council Faherty, particularly Council Flynn and Council Faherty, for your advocacy on this issue. My name is Michael Christopher. I'm the Interim Director of Development Review at the Boston Planning and Development Agency. My remarks today will be brief. Our goal is to engage in a productive dialogue with this body. I am joined by my colleague, Lauren Shirtliff, the Director of Planning at the BPDA, Leon Bethune, Director of Community Initiatives Bureau at the Boston Public Health Commission, and Chris English, who is the Chief of Staff at ISD. Our goal today is to talk about the built environment and how we evaluate current proposals in front of us. I know Councilors Flynn and Baker are hosting another hearing focusing on workforce development as it relates to the life science industry, and we look forward to participating in that. As I think many folks in this call are aware, Article 80 sets up the initial permitting framework for how we evaluate large-scale projects in the city. Throughout this process, we evaluate things like use, height, density, setbacks, urban design, transportation, affordable housing, and public realm. We work closely with our urban design and planning staff to evaluate all of these proposals relative to current neighborhood context. And within the Article 80 process, we also conduct neighborhood dialogue and public meetings to take both public and written comment as it relates to specific proposals. Throughout this process, we are constantly reshaping the projects to address and mitigate the different concerns that come up through the regulatory and community dialogue. This is meant to be an iterative process to ensure that issues that are coming up are being addressed, and that both the BPDA and the development teams work to address the current concerns specifically raised by the communities. As it relates specifically to the life science industry, we work closely with the development teams. We've spent a lot of over the past year or so really working with the industry to better understand how their buildings are put together. It's a new industry as it relates to kind of where they want to be. We have a lot of history in the LMA and a lot of our health institutions, and really kind of evaluating those buildings, which is kind of a whole different context when you kind of look at what we're evaluating now as it relates to where these projects are being proposed. And we've spent a lot of time, particularly our urban design team, which is made up of architects, to really understand how these buildings, how they can be shaped right from kind of a density floor plate standpoint. What is the public realm experience? What are the ability to do setbacks? To Council Faherty's point, how can you shape the mechanicals in a way? There is no doubt that these buildings, one of the main differences between this and an office building is the roof, and I would say the other main difference would be the massing. They tend to have heavier floor plates. So our staff has spent a lot of time really trying to understand the makeup of these buildings and how we can really shape them, particularly as it relates to as we get closer to these neighborhoods and address and trying to understand some of the community's concerns and how we can push them from a building perspective. I am joined by my colleague, Lauren Shurtleff, who is the Director of Planning, and she's here to answer any questions that come up. Like I mentioned in the beginning, we really want this to be an open back and forth dialogue so that we can kind of address specific issues that come up. I'm now going to turn it over to Leon Bethune from the Department of Public Health, who can walk through the how the BPH deals with regulating labs as it relates to different levels. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Good morning, Chairwoman Wu and members of the committee. My name is Leon Bethune, and I'm testifying today on behalf of the Boston Public Health Commission, where I direct the Community Initiatives Bureau, which includes the Biological Safety Program. Today, I'm also here with my colleagues from the Biological Safety Program, Simon Muchoai and Julian Farland, and they'll help me answer any questions that may come up after my testimony. So today, I'd like to share with you just a brief overview of our oversight of our biosafety level 3 and biosafety level 4 research labs, and also those working with recombinant DNA materials at biosafety level 2, and how we incorporate community voices into that work. Before I move forward, I just want to be clear that the Boston Public Health Commission has no authority over lower level biological labs or other types of life science labs. We're not involved in deciding on the zoning or the location of the biological research labs or life science labs in Boston. Instead, we really focus our efforts and resources on the labs, on the safety of the labs facilities that pose the major risk to the health of the workers and the residents of Boston, and also the environment of Boston. So just to go back a little bit of history, the Boston Board of Health adopted the biological regulations in 2006 and then amended them in 2019. The regulation requires that anyone operating or planning to operate a biosafety level 3 or level 4 lab, research lab in the city, apply and receive an annual permit from the Boston Public Health Commission. The regulation also requires anybody that's working with recombinant rDNA research at biosafety level 2, 3, and 4 to be permitted by the Boston Public Health Commission. This is, as Mr. Aber said, it's a unique authority among local health departments because it provides Boston with an important extra layer of regulatory oversight at the local level. And I think there's only other one city that has this, and I think it's Grafton. At the local level, we've developed stringent measures to ensure that the biosafety level 3 and level 4 labs operate safety in our community, including an annual permitting. There's also an incident reporting requirement that's needed, and also a rigorous approval process for research projects. So I'm going to talk about how an entity goes about getting a permit. So basically, to get a permit, the entity must apply and submit supporting documents, including policies, procedures related to lab safety, security, transportation, and biological materials. We also look at their waste disposal, how they commission the lab, how they decommission the lab, how they terminate the work with the agents they're working with, so it's done in a safe way, the training of all employees, how they interface with the occupational health programs, how they plan for emergency response, and then if they're done working with the lab, how are they going to decommission that lab? So, and with that said, both the Boston Public Health Commission and also the fire department, we make sure we conduct rigorous laboratory inspections before a new permit is issued. So as the inspection process goes, we inspect biosafety level 3 and biosafety level 4 labs at least twice a year. Any regulated lab must be inspected at any time in response to an incident or a public health safety concern, with or without notice from us. We also have the authority to review any documents and records related to the operation of a permanent laboratory. Our regulation also requires upon, for a level 4 and level 3 and level 4 lab to submit incident investigation reports and after action reports if we discover the laboratory had an acquired infection or occupational exposure or failure of a containment system or any critical equipment. So for instance, if their HVAC system goes down, they have to report that to us. If somebody gets infected with an agent, they have to report that to us. So the other layer that's there is all institution operating, biosafety level 3 and level 4 labs are required to hold a public IBC. It's called the Institutional Biosafety Committee meeting every year. The meeting must be open to the public and be held in a location that's easily accessible to the public and persons with disability. And finally, every regulated lab must submit an annual IBC report to the commission. The level 3 and level 4 lab, as Mr. Aber said, are also subject to regulatory oversight by state and federal agencies, including the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, the Massachusetts Water Resource Authority, the CDC, the NIH, the Department of Agriculture, and the EPA, and the Department of Transportation. And as I said, like all entities operating, and especially a level 4 lab, must provide and maintain a community benefits program to support local health and safety needs. The entity is required to submit an annual report detailing the operations of that program. We also created a Boston Biosafety Committee under the regulations. The committee is an advisory group of scientific experts, professionals, community representatives, and just to make sure everybody knows, all level 4 permit application individual research projects must be reviewed by the committee before they're approved by BPHC for any work to be done in the city. We also have a biosafety working group, which includes a representative from the local emergency first response responder community, which includes Boston EMS, Boston Fire, Boston Police Department, the Mayor Office of Emergency Management, and also our Office of Public Health Preparedness. The level, and this is all based for the level 3 and level 4 labs. We also hold quarterly meetings to discuss emergency response planning, which includes drills and exercise. I would like to also inform this committee that we are currently seeking applicants for our community for the community representative seat on the Boston Biosafety Committee, which turns over every 2 years. And if you need any information, that can be found on our website. We hope that the councilors can share this opportunity with their constituents and networks. Thanks again for the opportunity to testify, and look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers from the administration who would like to jump in?
No, that's it, Counselor.
Great. All right. Thank you for your time, everyone. We'll start with Counselor Flynn for questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Wu, and thank you to the panelists for being present, for providing excellent information that I know it's helpful. one of my focuses over the last several years has also been on the South Boston waterfront, making sure that that is a strong, viable neighborhood. And obviously a lot of life sciences are moving in there, including the Fort Point neighborhood. I know the fire department plays an important role in this discussion as well. I want to highlight again, as we continue to focus on this issue, which I support the life sciences community. I also want to see a fire presence in and around the Fort Point neighborhood in the South Boston waterfront, which we currently don't have a permanent presence. I think that is critical to this discussion, especially when we are continuing to invest millions of dollars into the waterfront in the Fort Point. We need a fire department that is very close to the life sciences. I think that's obvious for all of us to acknowledge that. So I want to ask maybe Chris English, what steps are you doing in terms of working closely with residents in the neighborhood, whether it's through the neighborhood process or community meetings? But when an office wants to convert from traditional office space to life sciences, what role is the city playing to ensure that the neighborhood voice in process runs smoothly?
Thanks for the question, Councillor. I would say the role of the Inspectional Services Department in labs is sort of interim between the upfront planning and siting and design work that the BPDA does and the operational and ongoing work that the Boston Public Health Commission does. ISD is involved sort of the construction and inspection of construction sites and labs. When an applicant seeks to change a use of an existing building or construct a new facility, those applications are reviewed for compliance with the building and the zoning codes. When there are zoning or building code issues with the application themselves, ISD would refuse the application, and those can then be appealed to the Zoning Board of Appeal, during which time there's a community process primarily managed by the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Services. We sort of administer the hearings, and then upon decision of the Board of Appeal, we issue permits.
And Council, I could probably just be helpful to add in on that. And I think just for context, I think, relative to this industry and kind of what we're seeing currently, we have, we have projects that are kind of at the initial stages of Article 80 where they're really, they have, whether it be a life science developer or a private developers coming in and they have a proposal, right? And they want to, they're looking to build ground up. And that's kind of goes through that full Article 80 project like I referenced. We also then have, projects that have been built as office and are now switching over to lab. And particularly Councillor Flynn, I know we've worked closely in your district. We've had a couple of those. And what will happen is that, we will, once we get the notification, we will then go out and conduct a notice of project change process, which essentially is a community. It will entail both a regulatory review of kind of the building and looking at the things like I mentioned, setback, height, density, any physical changes to the building, particularly focusing on the roof on a lot of these built buildings. And then we will also go out and engage the community in a public process and have a comment period and trying to address those concerns and mitigate those concerns throughout that process. And it will have to go to our board to codify the switch from office to lab.
Thank you. My next question would maybe would be to Lauren. Lauren, in your planning capacity, are you working with potential proposals and encouraging them to put their mechanicals or identifying other locations mechanicals can be placed other than on top of a roof, as Councilor Flaherty highlighted?
Yeah, thank you for your question, Councillor. So part of the issue with building mechanicals is that they don't count towards the actual building height. And so if we're talking about enclosing them, which I think is a completely worthy discussion, this also means that the actual height of the building would likely also have to go up. So it's oftentimes, say if, an area is zoned for 100 feet, and like Councilor Flaherty said, maybe there's at that point 20 feet of mechanicals, the building's height would actually be 120 feet. And so it becomes this kind of delicate play back and forth where, there's a certain height that a lab building needs to be. They're generally not, 400 feet, but they are taller generally than 70 or 80 feet. And so once you have those mechanicals, obviously that when they're not enclosed, they don't count towards the actual building height. There is also sometimes a challenge with, I don't think you can actually fully enclose a lot of them because there is, different kind of air requirements and that sort of thing. So we're absolutely looking at it, and rest assured, our most important criteria when looking at these is how is this going to impact the existing context of the neighborhood and the people that are already there. And so I would just say that, we have been pushing back against proposals, particularly in places where we do not think that they're necessarily going to add to the community and to the neighborhood character. Say, for instance, when, they're across the street from an embedded residential neighborhood that's just triple deckers. That's completely inappropriate from our perspective. But it's a very, very long discussion. And as you can imagine, we want the community to also be involved in that, which is fortunately what we have the Article 80 process for. The other thing I would just add is that we do have discussions internally amongst the planners and urban designers here on staff all of the time about this. So we actually do have a working group that's trying to come up with a system of kind of best practices moving forward, because we're also very understanding of the fact that this kind of lab momentum is not going anywhere, and that while it's important for the city's growth and development on the one hand, we also want to make sure that we're being completely sensitive to the people that are already either residing nearby, working nearby, or just enjoying their neighborhood.
That might be, Councilor, a good question for the industry too. I think, I know having conversations with the industry around, is there an ability to move the mechanicals into the building? I think there is the potential to do that. It obviously impacts the building layout, and I am not an architect, but I think the industry would probably speak to it better, but some of the core layouts relative to the elevator shafts, it does present some challenges, but it's not, it's not impossible. And I think, being a sophisticated industry, I think we're going to continue to push them. And I think I'd be curious to kind of how they view when you take the mechanicals and kind of embed them into the building.
And it can also be done through, really careful screening, which is what our urban design staff is constantly advocating for, is how do we screen these? Are they visible from the street? Sometimes they aren't because of the height and where they're set back. So all of this is, and again, it's really hard to talk about this in the abstract. It's much easier if we have a specific project, because we could actually kind of walk you through how our team reviews these things. But I agree. I think, Mike, you're onto something with saying somebody that actually designs these buildings might be able to even better answer that question.
Mm-hmm. And I guess my final question, I'll ask it to Leon. Leon, what is your role in terms of educating the public regarding the different types of labs that are proposed in a residential neighborhood? Are you providing any input or any communication to residents about the safety of a lab? What roles will the lab play next to a residential community, in the different types of labs as well? Those are common questions I receive from residents. I have 3 proposals right at St. Vincent's community in South Boston, residential area. So residents are asking me those basic questions. So I guess my question to you is, what's your response from a public health professional?
That's a good question, Council Flynn. So for us, I mean, we don't get, like I said in my testimony, we don't get involved with, the planning and the zoning of these labs. But once the lab is in place and it's under our permit, they have to every year their institutional biosafety committee must have a public meeting to basically and they have to invite the public. They have to invite all the abutters. They have to put it in the newspaper. I think we probably reached out to you guys maybe a few times to send to your constituents about some of these meetings, but that's where the entity will educate the public on the work that's actually being done in the lab, and also they'll also educate the public about the various labs that they have, and that's something that so. It's sort of like after the fact. Once we get the permit and they're under our jurisdiction, we have to make sure that happens. But as for any if folks want to be educated, we've we've done that. We've educated public, anybody who comes to our door about our regulations and the various labs that operate in the city.
And I know, Councillor, we've talked about, just with all this influx, especially those ones I referenced, the two office to lab of partnering with you on doing some kind of non-project information sessions with the community. And I think and I know we would definitely pull in BPH to really kind of do this broader education and work with the industry as well, so that folks can really delineate the difference between kind of not even just the levels within life science, but also the different industries within research and development, right? Every life science is the big dominant one, but there's a lot of layers within research and development. So we're very much open to that.
Yeah, thank you, Councilor Wu. Thank you to the panelists. I don't have any further questions, but I know, just to follow up on Mike's comments, this is something I definitely will do in the fall, is maybe have one or two not traditional hearings, but informational sessions in the community where residents can learn more about life sciences. And maybe my colleague is also on, as Councilor Braden, maybe even having a listening session, educational session in the Alston and Brighton area as well. Anyway, thank you to the panelists, and thank you, Councilor Wu.
And we'd be happy to come to those sessions if, just let us know.
Yeah, that's excellent. Thank you, Leon.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. And now Councillor Faherty is next.
Yep, thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to sort of stay maybe on mechanicals for a little bit in terms of whether or not we have engaged any engineers, or are there any examples out there where they were able to I guess, put the mechanicals into the guts of the building, or as Lauren had suggested, shielding them. It's hard to shield, mechanicals that are 37 feet high, and the concerns around, obviously, not just the sight of them, but the sounds, as well as, folks have concerns about what, may be coming out of them. So to the best of our ability, working with the industry, we should be trying to talk about putting the mechanicals into the guts of the building, and or the new owners and or the new tenant, they may need to seed that top floor, and do their part as well. So I just want to make sure that that's on the table. In the instance of where you can't put them into the building, maybe a situation where they have to surrender that top floor as a community service to the community and to the direct abutters. So not like someone wants to seed an entire floor of a footprint, but it may be what's necessary if we're going to continue to see these conversions. I do have some concerns around sort of the, with a lot of the purpose-built empty space that we're seeing in premium locations. Some of it was before the pandemic, mostly from the pandemic, where we're, on the commercial side, we will witness firsthand that when their lease renewals are up, they just won't commit to the exact amount of square footage, because they are allowing their employees to work from home. They've seen some success with that. They also there's a new model, I guess, now that folks are talking about. You can just see it just driving around the city. You don't have, we're not seeing the traffic that we used to see. And so I know that CEOs and their teams are sort of reimagining their workspace. They're in the process of negotiating with their landlord and or their commercial brokers. In many instances, I'm talking to folks, they're taking less square footage. They're eliminating floors. So that's not good news for the city, of course, particularly as it pertains to our tax base and the resources we use to fund our schools and public safety and our street cleaning, snow plowing, and trash removal, et cetera. But so these are real concerns, and I know that obviously life sciences has been playing a huge role in being willing to take up that space, and so it cuts both ways. I look at life sciences a lot like our community health centers. Wherever there's a community health center in Boston, all the businesses around that community health center are thriving. The coffee shops, the sandwich shops, et cetera. And a lot like that, because life science, there's a demand that folks be in the lab, they be at that workspace, and as a result of which, all those amenities and ancillary services in the neighborhood would benefit from that. So I see an upside in all of that. I just worry about sort of all that sort of purpose-built commercial space and at what pace. I guess that's the second part of that question is how much of this rush to convert commercial to lab is speculative or is there a real demand to get this done? So I'd like to hear from someone on that front. Also want to know whether or not there's been any notable incidents, as part of the education piece with respect to any public safety concerns or public health concerns at any of the existing, Boston labs or life science spaces, and whether or not our officials have considered, particularly where we're seeing a significant number of, new life science buildings and labs coming online, as to whether or not they would consider a new fire station. I think it's recently I learned that we had I don't think we have a ladder company in the South End. At one point they eliminated, I believe it was ladder 13. So given that there's a level 4 biolab there, but other labs that are sort of encroaching in and around the South End, I think we need to put a focus on putting a ladder company in as well, just to make sure that we're doing the best we can and making sure that the public is protected in the event of an incident. And again, I don't know whether or not there's been any incidents, and if so, what have those incidents been? And I think that's a piece that needs to be shared with the community, if any. But I think that's it. So if we can talk about these mechanicals and what the plan is around the mechanicals, and whether we've engaged any engineers that have had some success sinking the mechanicals into the building, and or new landlords and or new tenants being willing to sort of seed and forfeit that top floor in the effort to, sink those mechanicals so that the direct abutters don't have to see these hulking, noisy, sort of fume and emission emitting systems on top of the roof next to their house. Thank you.
So I do know we have some of the questions relative to the engineering of the buildings. I would defer to the other panel just because I want them to kind of speak to that as industry experts. What I would say I think I can lump your kind of office to lab into the question around height and density. When we start from an Article 80 perspective and we're looking at the initial height and we're evaluating kind of what the roof's going to look like, we have the ability through our process to kind of lower that building potentially to allow for some mechanics. So that gives us a lot more flexibility. When you get into these office to labs, we should be clear. We are definitely seeing it at a higher volume, but only certain buildings have the makeup to be able to go from an office to a lab because of the way they're set up. Obviously we have an older, so most of, and once again, that'd be a good question for the industry, but I know, older buildings are extremely challenging. Obviously the floor plates and kind of the size of the actual buildings are a huge challenge. So you can see this potentially in a new construction building, which is 2 of the NPCs we dealt with. Councilor, I know you involved 69 A Street and 321 Harrison. Those are new construction buildings that were scheduled to be office that then came back to us to be lab. Another one we're dealing with is the 601 Congress Street, which is the Mass 4 parcel that Manulife building was in, Manulife left. That is a new construction within the last 10 years, set up a little bit more to be able to be converted to lab. So that's kind of, what we're seeing relative to the overall, what the industry, what's happening on the commercial marketing office front. And then on the other questions relative to safety, I'll defer to Leon or PPH on any, any incidents that have come up relative to the current industry.
Yeah. As the question to the incidents, we haven't had any, we haven't cited any recent incidents, but, we do get lab incident reports, as I stated in my testimony. So we get reports from, the various entities we permit, and usually it's somebody working with a mouse, a clean mouse, and they get bitten by them and it's uninfected. Needle sticks, we get reports on those. And also recently we got an incident where somebody cut their finger using it's called a microblade, and so we investigate those all those incidents, and we make sure that there's a preventive action that entity would have to implement, so this wouldn't happen again. And so the only other one I could mention is that we had last year with COVID, we had a few labs working with COVID-19 and materials, and these are like pieces of genetic materials from the COVID virus, and since they do routine testing of everybody, COVID testing for the lab workers, we had a few false positives from the test, and so we partnered with the Department of Public Health, and we made sure that there was special precautions that were implemented, so the lab workers wouldn't get false positives as they get tested. And so we regularly get lab incidents from all our labs, and we make sure we investigate just to make sure that, and usually it's safety, it's to the safety of the worker. So we make sure that there's an investigation, and just to make sure that when we look at the standard operating procedures and protocols are in place, so these incidents won't happen again. And a lot of it is just like retraining that worker on like how to handle a lab rat or how to use a piece of equipment and that sort of stuff. So, but that's what we've seen so far within the last year.
And just to follow up to Leon, maybe through your advocacy, you could work with Council Flynn and I to talk about the need for fire station on the South Boston waterfront. I referenced earlier. So the south end, obviously, that has the level 4 biolab plus other labs. They're serviced by one ladder company, which is Ladder 17. And the first responder for the biolab would actually be Ladder 4 out of Dudley. So I would make a strong argument that the south end needs another ladder company, but the South Boston waterfront, with the emergence of not just our sort of life science and lab partners, but just our partners in general. A lot of companies, a lot of CEOs are moving their companies down to the South Boston waterfront. So, and given the need to make sure that the public is protected down there, it would make some sense to identify an area. Council Flynn has been advocating strongly for standalone fire station down on the South Boston waterfront, but I also want to make sure we're paying close attention to the south end and the fact that the entire community in the south end is only serviced with one ladder company, which is located, I guess it's right off of Columbus. So pretty big turf for one ladder company. And I think that years ago, there was a Ladder 13 that was eliminated, that if that can be restored to the south end as we're dealing with labs and incidents. And like I said, it's what you've just described doesn't seem to be of any major concern, but we want to make sure that in the event of an incident that we have enough fire protection to be able to get to people quickly. And the way it's currently configured, particularly as it pertains to the biolab, the first ladder company assigned is ladder 4 and over at Dudley. A little bit of a haul, factor in whatever time of the day it is, traffic, etc. Potentially leaves occupants of that building as well as surrounding buildings in a tough situation there. So any advocacy, Leon, you could bring to the table working with us to try to get some additional fire support would be great.
Happy to help out. Thanks.
Thank you, Leon. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Flaherty. I'm going to pass it on to Councillor Braden, and then unfortunately I have to run, but Councillor Flynn has graciously agreed to step in and continue chairing his own hearing anyway. So Councillor Braden, please, and sorry everyone for my time.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had a few, I'm just curious how many level 3 and 4 labs we actually have in Boston at the moment, and in terms of future anticipated developments, are we looking how many more do we expect to see? I had a concern. We hear a lot about the seafront, the South Boston waterfront, and the seaport, and the vulnerability to sea level rise and storm surge, especially in the Fort Point area. I was wondering, how new labs what is their emergency management planning with regard to extreme weather events like power outages and flooding that might occur when if we have a Hurricane Sandy or a Superstorm Sandy that hits Boston, what that scenario looks like, and what are the emergency plans that might be needed. And then, we mentioned people getting bitten by lab mice. I'm just curious about the numbers of lab animals we are working with in the city in these facilities, and what sort of regulations are in place to ensure that they are treated humanely and well. I had also wonder about in terms of utility infrastructure. This is a lot of new industry that's coming in that has probably a pretty high demand for power and water, and our water and sewage system. I don't know, are there special protocols with regard to backup generation and emergency power sources for these labs if the power goes down? And then the other issue that we talk about in Alston Brighton that we haven't mentioned with regard to new labs is the whole requirement about parking for workers. I know our new labs are expecting a lot of parking, like two parking spaces per square foot in some places. So I was wondering if the BPDA policy on parking requirements extends right across the city, or is it just limited to Alston Brighton? Those are all my questions.
Leon, do you want to so just on the parking, BTD has drafted parking regulations that I would defer to them on, but they are across the entire city. So it's not just your district councilor. But on the other stuff, Leon or Simon or anyone at BPH, if you want to touch on that. Great questions.
Yeah, a lot of questions, Council Braden. I just so the first question is you asked is how many biosafety level 3 and 4 labs in Boston. So we have 7 biosafety level 3 labs, and they're situated at Harvard University, Boston University, Tufts, Dana-Farber, and Children's Hospital. And we only have 1 level 4 lab, which is on Albany Street, and that's the Boston University Needle Lab. So when I would say about 10 years ago, I think we had up to like 13 labs, and it's actually shrunk down now to 7. A few of the labs shut down. So the thing about level 3 and level 4 labs, they're very expensive to operate. So I don't think be others coming online anytime soon. You may see a lot more, level 2 labs coming into the city. I mean, from just looking at the trends, that's what I see. I know you had other questions and I didn't get to write them down.
Yeah, the other, in terms of our utilities for to support these labs, like I think a power outage has a pretty devastating effect on a lab facility. You could wipe out a year's work if you have an emergency with power. I'm just wondering about backup generation and especially down in the South End and the Fort Point area in terms of emergency planning for extreme weather events. Flooding and power outages, etc.
So I know the labs that we permit, they have to have a 1+2 system. So they have to have backup when it comes to, if there's ever a power outage, and those need to be tested, every, I think it's quarterly, to make sure that it works. So I don't know about the other level 2 labs, whether, they have backup generation. I don't know. I could probably port this question over to Simon. He may know a little better than me on that. But I know for our labs, they all have to have backup generation.
Very good. And then the other issue was with regard to lab animals and their humane treatment. I know this has sort of come out of left field. I'd forgotten about the lab animals.
Yep. So I'll let Simon talk about that one. Simon?
Yes. Thank you, Leo. For most of the institutions that are working with animals are the ones which have level 3 and 4 labs. Right now, we only have, I think, only 2 biotech companies that are working with animals because we permit them. Then, animal research is regulated at the federal level. The U.S. Department of Agriculture requires that any institution that is working with animals, they have to a committee that is known as IACAC, Institutional Use and Animal Care Committee. And every institution must have that. And the IBC, the Institutional Biosafety Committee, also look at all those protocols to make sure that the animals are treated humanely. Because if you don't do that, then you lose your funding and the federal government can cite you for that. So very strict regulation on that.
That's good to know. Thank you. I think that's all my questions for now. Councillor Flynn, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Braden.
Councillor Flynn, just a quick question. Has NAIOP, have they been invited? Just curious as to.
Can you say the name again?
The Association of Industrial Property Owners. Do you know, are they on the list? Have they been invited today?
Yeah, Councillor, I think they're in the next panel.
All right, perfect. Got it.
Yep.
Thank you. I just want to, they're an important partner and curious to see what they have to say in terms of their holdings and their prospective building owners and tenants. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Faherty. Next up is our colleague from District 1, Councillor Lydia Edwards. Councillor Edwards, would you like to give a opening statement and maybe ask a few questions as well?
Thank you very much. I want to again thank the co-sponsors, Councillor Faherty and Councillor Flynn, for their leadership in this. I think we're getting ahead of what is going to be an emerging movement for life sciences, for lab space. And I love that we're having this conversation now instead of after the fact. I also just say right now, if I back of the envelope math for just Charlestown alone, I'm seeing 1.5 million square feet of lab space that's slated to come online. We just saw recently in Suffolk Downs, some of the housing has been turned to office space or lab space as well. And so I have a lot of questions about that. I have a lot of questions about the impacts for our neighborhood. I'm glad, thank you, Councilor Braden, for your questions about the level of what is going to be done in the lab spaces. But I also have a question about who's going to be not only building them. I know we have a Boston job policy, but who's going to be working in them? Our policies really have to do with construction, not necessarily our commitment from a lot of these future owners for the percentages for Boston residents or our kids to be pipelined from our high schools or from our community colleges. And I want to know what that looks like in terms of making sure that this is a growing industry for everybody in Boston. I also want to make sure that as we're changing over, we don't put ourselves in a position where we're so heavily dependent on our new jobs coming just from this industry. Like any other place and any other time, the economy ebbs and flows. And that's my biggest concern as well, is that we're diversified in what kind of lab space we're building and who is building it, and also who is working in them. Finally, I just wanted to note, one of the things we're still going to have to deal with is who's going to house the workers, where are the workers going to live? Are we setting people up to have 2-hour commutes again through our communities, again on our highways, again polluting our lungs, either whether it's in Chinatown, Charlestown, or East Boston? And we need to make sure that we have an infrastructure that supports this massive amount of new people coming to work in and around our neighborhoods. So thank you so much again for this conversation. I look forward to also, in terms of the community process, I don't think just having a traditional IAG that is used to residential and used to extracting mitigation for housing is going to be enough. I would love to know that there's an orientation around lab space, preparing people who are going to be asking questions on behalf of their neighborhood, what the benefits and mitigation and the possibilities are, because I think that it's a different conversation. And I really hope that the city is going to lead and push us to demand more of lab space. I know we should be welcoming to industry, but they should also be proud and honored to be able to build and grow and have a business in Boston. So thank you so much for this opportunity, Councilor Flynn and Councilor Faherty. I look forward to hearing responses.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Edwards, for your comments. At this time, the first panel is completed. I don't have any additional colleagues from the City Council that are waiting. So the first panel is basically excused. Certainly you can stay on and listen. But at this time, Kerry, I was going to bring in the second panel, and let me introduce the second panel as you bring them on, Kerry, if that's okay.
Councilor, I just wanted to say thank you for hosting this, and we look forward to ongoing dialogue, and we will be staying on in the background to listen. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, Michael, and again, thank you to the BPDA team, to the city officials that are here. Greatly appreciate your professionalism and working closely with you guys. So thank you. At this time, the second panel is coming on, and I'm going to introduce or recognize them. Tamara Small is the CEO of...
I'm sorry, Councilor Flynn. I'm actually here on behalf of Tamara Small.
Oh, okay.
Anastasia Nicola.
Okay. Anastasia Nicola. Okay, Vice President of Policy and Public Affairs. I also have Ben Bradford, who is the Vice President of Membership and Economic Development. We have Ken Turner, the President, CEO of Mass Life Sciences Center.
Good morning, Councilor. Zach Stanley is representing Mass Bio this morning.
Okay. Hey, Zach. And is Bob Coughlin with us? Okay, so we have Anastasia and we have Zach that will be testifying. Okay, at this time, I'm going to ask Anastasia to provide an opening statement and maybe give a little bit of background about your organization as well, Anastasia, and then after that we'll go to Zach from Mass Bio.
Great, thank you so much, Councilor Flynn, and thank you for having us here this morning. For the record, my name is Anastasia Nicolau, and I am the Vice President of Policy and Public Affairs at NAIOP Massachusetts, the Commercial Real Estate Development Association. NAIOP represents the interests of more than 1,700 members involved in the development, ownership, management, and financing of office, research and development, industrial, mixed-use, multifamily, and retail space, both in Boston and across the Commonwealth. We greatly appreciate the opportunity to offer testimony today on Docket 0330. Boston's demand for lab and life science space is, frankly, among the highest in the nation's research clusters, buoyed by our access to top universities, an incredible talent pipeline, and high rates of life science venture capital investments. However, the life science real estate market remains severely constrained, which makes it difficult for Boston to compete among other science clusters such as San Francisco, New York, Philadelphia, and San Diego. The demand for new square footage in Boston is currently double that of a typical 7-year outlook at 4 million square feet. And vacancies in Boston are at 1.1%, with the larger market of the greater Boston area hovering at about 2.5%. The lack of supply is causing pricing to skyrocket, and we're actually seeing rents in Watertown reach levels comparable with those seen in Kendall Square pre-pandemic. New space on the market is not projected to temper the record-setting demand in Greater Boston for months, given that over 50% of the space coming onto the market at the end of 2022 is already pre-leased. In many ways, this demand in new space construction is underpinning much of the state's short and long-term recovery from the effects of COVID-19. With over 650 life science companies operating in Massachusetts, the innovation economy is a cornerstone of our success. Urban commercial lab space is becoming more and more popular as cluster development, public transportation access, and walkability have come to the forefront of residents' minds. Investors are making real estate decisions holistically, hoping to attract and retain talent, as well as cultivate the type of quality work and living environment that enables companies and their employees to prosper. Residents will benefit from this increased investment in their neighborhood in many ways. As we saw in Watertown and Kendall Square, when labs go in, restaurants, retail, and housing follow. When labs open, foot traffic in the neighborhood increases, and it positively impacts small businesses and restaurants. Given the recent economic downturn and the very real negative effects that many of our small businesses are facing in the city due to a lack of foot traffic, it is critical that these new investments and projects be supported by policymakers. Creating space for the life sciences also creates a tremendous positive impact on Boston's workforce via construction jobs, permanent positions, and in secondary fields. According to the June release of the Mass Bioeducation Foundation's Employment Outlook report, if current trends continue, the industry can be expected to add 20,000 new jobs over the next 4 years across all occupations. While many typically think of the life science sector as requiring a PhD, the reality is that 47% of these jobs only require a bachelor's degree, and 13% of the jobs in the sector require an associate's degree or high school diploma. It's also very important to note that lab and research facilities are highly regulated both in design and in operation. Facility building and subsequent operations are strictly regulated at the state level through the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection's regulatory schemes for air pollution control, industrial wastewater, and hazardous waste. Additionally, at the federal level, the CDC provides strict operating and facility construction guidelines for every classification of lab, with BSL or biosafety level 1 classified as the lowest risk and BSL 4 classified as the highest risk. In the city of Boston, the Boston Public Health Commission must provide a permit for regulated laboratory space for lab types from BSL 2 to BSL 4, and before any intended such use can proceed. Air emissions are closely regulated, and building systems, including the supply and exhaust systems, are monitored constantly to ensure proper orientation, with power backups and fail-safes to ensure system continuity. Additionally, there is a clear distinction between commercial lab buildings, which tend to be rated as BSL 2 or lower, and institutional research facilities, of which you received a list earlier from our colleagues at the Public Health Commission, which may operate at higher biosafety levels. According to the CDC, which tracks all designations, there are no commercial lab buildings in the city of Boston registered as BSL 3 or BSL 4, nor is NAIOP aware of any proposed commercial BSL 3 or BSL 4 labs before the BPDA. NAIOP strongly believes that the life science sector is crucial to Boston's recovery from the effects of COVID-19. Currently, as the councilors know, the Bureau of Labor Statistics states that there are almost 30,000 individuals who are unemployed in the city, up from 9,751 in February of 2020. Businesses large and small have been devastated by the pandemic, and the reality is that Boston's recovery will not happen overnight. Lab and life science benefits Boston by both expanding the property tax base, which allows increased investment in schools and social services, and in creating new high-paying jobs that are accessible to all residents. NAB also believes that it is critical the economic benefits of the sector reach every Bostonian. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify today. I'll turn it over to my colleague at MassBio, Zach Stanley.
Thank you, Anastasia. So the next person would be Zach Stanley, and I know Ben Bradford works with you, Zach. So do you want to speak on behalf of MassBio, Zach?
Yes, thank you, Councilor. I'd be happy to speak on behalf of MassBio this morning. And thank you, Councilor. Thank you, Councilor Faherty, for the opportunity to speak today, members of the committee. Again, my name is Zach Stanley. I'm Executive Vice President of MassBio. And before I start my testimony, I just do want to recognize and thank the councilors on today for your positive remarks about the life sciences industry's impact on the city of Boston and to its residents. I full-heartedly agree and believe that we've seen in other cities and towns across the state the positive impact that our industry can have. And I hope in my testimony today I can give you a better sense of the success it's had in Boston over the years and also what we expect looking into the future. MassBio, to start, we are a state-based trade association. We represent over 1,400 member companies across the life sciences, the majority of which are in the biopharma companies. We are the oldest state biotech trade association in the country, and we were created in 1985. We believe Massachusetts really truly is in a great position right now as it relates to life sciences. We're currently the best place in the country for the life sciences, and many say, and we believe that we are the best place in the world for this industry to thrive. Our combination of world-leading talent, academic research centers, colleges and universities, private funders, and the longstanding support of state and city government makes Massachusetts' cluster unique. Boston is the prime example for this. These factors together make biopharma companies want to launch and grow here. And the data really does back this up. Over the last 15 years, biopharma jobs in the state have grown by 94%. We are now over 80,000 residents employed across the state in the life sciences and growing. Lab space has grown by 91% over the last 10 years, and we're over 35 million square feet of lab space across the state. Massachusetts receives more NIH funding per capita than any other state in the country. It's a leading reason why the biopharma companies continue to launch and grow here. And tied to that, venture capital funding in Massachusetts reached record levels in 2020. And as I'll talk about, that is a leading reason why there is the need for more lab space here. The growth is on pace to accelerate in coming years, and it's an exciting opportunity for Massachusetts and places like the city of Boston. Current estimates forecast between 10 and 20 million square feet of new lab space will be needed to build across the state in the next 5 years. This growth is largely driven by the sheer amount of new biotech companies being created. Venture capital funding of biotech companies continues to exceed records, leading to the launch of new companies and the expansion of existing organizations. These new and growing biotechs need lab space. And based on the data we're seeing, demand for labs is extremely strong and will continue to be into the future. Tied to that expansion, we expect an additional 20 to 40,000 new jobs to be created in the same time period across Massachusetts. And as Anastasia noted, these are not just PhDs. These are jobs across the industry, both inside and outside of labs. Boston's history with the life sciences industry is long and extremely successful. In fact, one of the first biotech companies ever created, one that still exists in a new form, Genzyme, launched in 1981 in Boston's Chinatown neighborhood. Boston has one of the highest densities of life sciences companies of anywhere in the state. And as you'll hear from others, this long history of successful biotech development has gone hand in hand with the development and implementation of stringent processes, procedures, and policies to ensure that any lab space development is safe, secure, and an integrated part of the city. We know our member companies demand the absolute best when it comes to facilities and labs. These companies are among the best and most prominent biotech companies in the world, and they will only locate in world-class facilities. And that is what we have seen and continue to see in Boston, lab developments being done by leading developers creating the best facilities. We at MassBio look forward to closely working with the committee and the City Council to answer any questions you may have and help ensure Boston is best situated to continue to be one of the best places in the world to launch and grow a biotech company. And as we continue the conversation, we really do look forward to the conversation around workforce development and ensuring that Boston residents are part of that talent pipeline. Thank you.
Thank you, Zach. At this time, I'm going to ask my council colleagues to engage in questions during this period. I'll start off and then I'll go to Councilor Flaherty and then Councilor Edwards and Councilor Braden and Councilor Edwards. So Zach and Anastasia, I know both of you mentioned that you don't need a PhD to work in this field. And I know your last sentence, Zach, stated that you want to work to make sure that residents of Boston also are able to participate in this growing field. My question to both of you is, how are you going to make that happen? How are you going to educate people in Mary Ellen McCormick in South Boston, or Cathedral in the South End, or Orchard Park in Roxbury? How are we educating them on STEM? How are we getting them into apprenticeship programs? What's that process like, and how successful have we been so far?
Absolutely. You know, I think first and foremost, the need to diversify the talent pipeline, whether it's based on where someone lives or their background, race, ethnicity, et cetera, is imperative, and something Mass Bio has been focused on for a long time. You know, looking back, if we have 20 to 40,000 new jobs to fill in the life sciences industry in the next 5 years, you know, that's an amazing opportunity, but I also view it as somewhat of a crisis. You know, right now, as we stand here, we don't know where those people are going to come from. So we have to look everywhere to get the best, most brightest talent we can. And part of that is diversifying the talent pipeline. So when we think about STEM education, the first step is awareness. And, you know, we're proud to work with our sister organization, the Mass Bio Educational Foundation, whose one of their primary missions is to raise awareness as early as elementary school, but certainly in middle school and high school, about STEM-related fields, especially in the life sciences. And that's something that we wholeheartedly support, because if you don't know that jobs in the life sciences is something that may interest you or may be available to you, you're not going to pursue that as part of your educational path. Secondarily, you know, we have programs in place for those who know they're interested in working in the life sciences to get integrated into them. So the best example right now is a project that we support with a number of other partners called Project On-Ramp, which creates opportunities for summer internships for currently is for college students interested in working in the life sciences who are first generation college. So these students predominantly are coming through Bottom Line. And many of them, most of them are from Massachusetts' colleges and universities, including probably the most coming from UMass Boston. It's a great opportunity for students to have access to the life sciences, create networks, and ultimately see what jobs may be available to them. That's just one example, and certainly there's many more that we're happy to bring to you in more detail, especially what's going on in the city of Boston proper. But we really are proud of that, and it's something we're working hard at because we have to do it in order to get the talent pipeline in a condition where we can supply the demand.
Thank you, Zach. So I think it's critical that we expand our outreach in educational opportunities, training opportunities to students in Boston. We need to make sure that they're connected to this growing field. And the only way they're able to get a job in that field is having a background in STEM, in being exposed to it. So I'm going to challenge you guys, Mass Bio, to do more in the city of Boston as we expand this field. But I want to make sure residents of the city are not left behind. Having said that, I have one other question. I'm going to hold off. And at this time, I'm going to ask my colleague, Councilor Flaherty, if you'd like to ask questions. Michael? Michael, I think you're on mute. Okay, Michael's not here apparently. Okay. At this time, I'm going to go to Councilor Braden from Alston and Brighton for questions. Councilor Braden?
I think I just want to continue the conversation about workforce development. You know, as we anticipate these labs coming online in the next few years, we need to be aggressively working to prepare our workforce, our college, high school students, et cetera, to be able to get into this industry. And I don't know, in terms of Project On-Ramp, how many students are we engaging with at this point, and what's your plan to ramp it up, if you excuse the pun? The other question I had was with regard to manufacturing. I know that the former Genzyme facility in Alston has a manufacturing, because all of these labs, if they're developing new drugs, etc., all those drugs need to be manufactured and prepared in different titrations for testing, and it really seems like we're a little behind in the manufacturing side of things as well. So I'd like your thoughts on those two issues.
Absolutely. Thank you, Councillor. On the Project On-Ramp front, I want to reiterate, that's just one initiative we have ongoing. There's others focused on apprenticeship and otherwise that I'm happy to follow up with you in more detail. Project On-Ramp has 128 students involved in the summer internship program this summer. That's more than double from the initial year 2 years ago. So we're very proud of the growth there and believe it is creating opportunities. There's students already who participated in the 2019 cycle who have received job offers as a result of their internships within the life sciences. So we know the program works, and we're looking to figure out how to best scale that.
I'm just curious about anticipated demand for workers. As we build, if we add another, I don't know, it's coming on really fast, but if we add a lot of new labs, what sort of workforce do we anticipate that we will need to recruit in the short term?
Sure. So our statewide numbers are estimates based on what we expect the lab supply across the state to look like. So between 10 and 20 million new square feet of lab potentially built over the next 5 years. There's some rough math you can do. It's about one new employee per 500 and so square feet of lab space. That's extremely rough. But that gets us to that 20 to 40,000 new employee number. The Mass Bio Ed report, which came out earlier this year, is right around a 20,000 new employee estimates over the next 4 years. So I think that math squares away in a rough sense. And obviously that's a statewide number. I don't have specifics in front of me for what that looks like in Boston.
Yeah. And, I really feel that in Boston, we have an untapped resource of young people who need to get into this industry. And, one thing that we're confronted with out on this edge of the city is that, when a lab developer comes in, they want us to build a lot of parking, which is based on the assumption that their workers are going to come from the suburbs somewhere and drive in thousands of cars every day. And as we really grapple with the challenges of climate change, that's something that's unsustainable and that we can't do. So I think training and recruiting locally is really key to making this a much more sustainable effort across the board. So I also ask you folks in your industry to advocate strongly for improved mass transit system like regional transit, so that if folks do have to come into the city to work, that they can come on mass transit rather than bring their cars, because it's a big jigsaw puzzle of so many moving parts, and the infrastructure, the transit infrastructure, and the power and utility infrastructure has to be able to deliver on all of this as well. So I'm just giving you a push to speak up at the state level about our regional transit, so that we can support this without increasing a lot of cars on our roads.
Without a doubt, Councilor, and it's something we've been doing for a number of years now on the transportation front, especially at MassBio. We know that two things, employees want to work close to where they live. And if they don't, they need reliable transportation networks to be able to get there. So one example comes to mind, we've been active in the conversations along with our partners in the business community around the Grand Junction project and the impact that would have on the city of Boston. But more importantly, people coming from the West and how they access Kendall Square via public transportation. That's a critical issue for us because we know if more employees can travel to Kendall Square via public transportation, via the train through that Grand Junction project, that's going to benefit everybody in the long term. So that's just one example. It's a high priority for us. The competitiveness issues that Massachusetts is facing in this industry are really unprecedented right now, and transportation is at the top of the list for why other states may be winning projects over Massachusetts. I'll just say on the manufacturing front, biomanufacturing, it's an exciting new entity that's in your district right now, and there's many others like it across the state. We see biomanufacturing as a gigantic opportunity in the workforce development front, especially for those looking at retraining opportunities, reskilling. As many of the manufacturers who are opening or expanding their sites do on-site trainings in order to build their workforce. It's also an area where you do not need advanced degrees primarily to fill these jobs. So we see that as a really exciting opportunity, whether it's in Boston or otherwise.
Very good. Keep advocating for improvements in our mass transit. And I really agree with you that the retraining and reskilling for the manufacturing side is critical as well. So thank you. And I look forward to continuing this conversation at another hearing we're going to have on workforce development for biotech. So Councillor Flynn, I have to jump off, but I want to thank everyone for their presentation this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Braden, for being with us. Councillor Faherty? Well, let me ask my question as we wait for Councillor Faherty to either Zach or Anastasia. What challenges or concerns do you have as we potentially locate, go from traditional office use to life sciences or labs in residential neighborhoods? Explain what your philosophy is and what challenges you think it may bring up, whether it's the permitting process, whether it's the neighborhood process, whether it's working closely with city government and neighborhood organizations. How does that play in your thinking?
I'll go first, and then you can finish us out. I think that as we're looking at this as an industry with lab becoming so critical, one of the things I mentioned is people wanting to live and work in their neighborhoods and seeing that opportunity go to every neighborhood in Boston so it's accessible to every Bostonian is critical. We're also talking, as I mentioned, about BSL 2s and BSL 1s that are considered very low risk. Education is critical, and I completely agree with you there, Councillor. The neighborhoods need to know what's actually going in. I would not want anything to go up that I don't understand, and I think education is critical, but we really are, especially in the commercial lab space, dealing with very, very safe, very highly regulated buildings that, they answer to the federal government, they answer to the state government, and of course their operations also answer to the city level. And I think something that's really important to underscore is the operators of these buildings want them to be safe as well. They do not want to have to report any incident to the Public Health Commission. There are fail safes in place. There are intense protocols for operations that go far beyond building systems. And that is why the CDC has such strict guidelines and why it's so monitored at so many different levels to really make sure that these are very safe buildings to go in, and so that residents can look at an opportunity and see that they can work in their neighborhood and not have to worry about getting there. And to Councilor Braden's point, I know she had to hop off, but greatly reduces an impact on public transportation or cars to be able to build across the city and to really educate residents about the safety of these buildings and how highly regulated they are at every stage.
Well, that's good to know. That type of information, Anastasia, is helpful to the residents. I just think we all, myself included, but we all need to do a better job of educating residents about the importance of life sciences in the city of Boston. I know they do a tremendous job, the benefits to the city of Boston, but we need to do a much better job of outreach communication with our residents on that issue and other issues. So appreciate your comments. And finally, my last question is, while I was on this call, I got a brief text from a CEO asking, you know, what can residents do about, you know, Councilor Faherty was talking about having a fire ladder in and around the south end, but also in and around the South Boston waterfront or Fort Point, which I certainly support. But I'm also advocating as well for an EMS presence that we don't have at the South Boston waterfront. But it's these quality of life, nuts and bolts, basic city services that I really focus on as the chair of City and Neighborhood Services. So this CEO of a company asked me, what can the business community, what can Mass Bio do in terms of helping the city with advocating for a fire presence and an EMS presence in the South Boston waterfront? What's your response to him, Zach?
Councilor, you know, I think we would be happy to be part of that conversation, figure out where we as a trade association could best lend our voice between the conversations between the council and the administration and residents, and how our members may interplay in that conversation as well. I don't have a good answer for you right off the top of my head here, but I think, you know, as a trade association representing a broad scope of members, I think we can think about what the best opportunity for us to engage in that conversation may be.
Anastasia, any comments on that question?
Again, happy to talk about how these efforts can be supported across the city. I think that different neighborhoods obviously have different needs, and developers do try to be sensitive to that in the community process that they work with. So happy to have continued conversations with you, Councilor, and any of the other councilors, kind of as these ideas are fleshed out to see where NAP can be supportive.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I know the importance of your job and you do it well, but my job is advocating for city services in Boston's neighborhoods, including the South End, the South Boston waterfront. But for life sciences to be successful, which I want them to be successful, the city government has to provide them with city services, such as fire presence and EMS presence, not just for residents that live near there, but also for the employers that work in these buildings as well.
I would also just add, Councilor, that the expanded property tax base that will come from a lot of these buildings coming online is certainly not negligible and an important part of the city operating budget, and has gone to fund many of the city services that are required in these neighborhoods. So there is an additional benefit of these buildings coming online and really being able to bring that investment back into the neighborhood, you know, if the city council or the mayor chooses to in the budget.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Anastasia, and thank you, Zach. I don't have any more of our colleagues on at this time. You guys can hang on if you'd like. We're going to go to public testimony from residents across the city. Hey, Kerry, I know Tom Reedy raised his hand earlier. Can we go to Tom Reedy first?
I've added Tom for you there, Councilor.
Oh, okay, I see him on now. Tom's a resident of the Fort Point neighborhood. Tom, you're on mute, but we'd love to hear your testimony, Tom.
Thanks, Councilor. I'm Tom Reddy. I live at 21 Wormwood Street, and I'm also a member of FPNA, the neighborhood association representing all of the residents of the South Boston waterfront. Thanks, Councilor Flynn and Councilor Faherty for your advocacy on this issue. And and of course to the committee chair, Councilor Wu, for scheduling the hearing. As of October 2020, in our neighborhood, we had 6 life sciences labs licensed by BPHC. I'm not quite sure what the current count is. I know it was mentioned earlier in the testimony that may have dropped due to COVID, but it was 6 back in October. More importantly, we currently have 13 new life sciences projects either proposed or under development, with 4 of these being conversions that are directly adjacent to large multi-tenant residential buildings. So clearly, our neighborhood has been impacted by the recent trend of labs in the city. We'd like to provide comments in 2 areas of the City of Boston's processes on how it engages the community on life sciences use, primarily zoning and licensing. So regarding zoning, we have experienced, my neighbors have experienced both new projects managed through the BPDA's Article 80 process and conversions of existing buildings to life sciences use. It should be recognized that the City of Boston zoning code does not have a defined use for life sciences, right? Life sciences buildings within a light manufacturing district or a PDA are treated as research and development use. And create this lack of zoning definition for life sciences creates 2 areas of concern for our residents in proximity to these types of buildings. First and foremost is when a developer undertakes a conversion from an existing property zoned as R&D, there is no change of use triggered that would engage the neighborhood through any city process. So whilst it was discussed earlier about change of use from office, change of use from R&D does not trigger any process. We have 3 of those in our neighborhood, 5 channel center, 20 to 30 channel center, and 51 sleeper that fit that criteria, and therefore residents were engaged through any zoning process. Second is, regardless of the type of the proposal, whether it's a new project or a conversion, the building characteristics that apply to life sciences buildings are actually tuned for R&D use. So they do not take into consideration nuances and differences of life sciences use, such as the height of the lab building mechanicals that had a lot of talk earlier today. And we all know those can be upwards of 40 feet above the last occupied floor. There's a difference in the work patterns that a lab operates under. And there's more of a 24-hour schedule that alters commuting patterns of the workforce and can generate additional ambient light out into the neighborhood because the buildings are operating 24 hours a day. There is potential for additional noise that's generated by the fans and vents needed to actually support the labs. And lastly, of course, there's a potential for the need to store hazardous materials on site. And that's just not the work associated in the labs, but it's the chemicals, right, that may support that work. So we would like to advocate for the creation of a category within the city zoning code specific to life sciences use, right? That would ensure there's appropriate resident engagement when these types of projects are being considered, right? Whilst we applaud the discussion, the robust discussion on how to design roof mechanicals differently, we actually think the simplest solution to address these excess heights is to change the height calculations within a life sciences use category in the zoning code from last occupied floor, which it currently is, to the top of the building. Right, this will ensure that there's compliance with approved height limits in the PDAs and zoning districts, and it would eliminate the doublespeak that currently takes place in public discussions when talking about things such as calculated height versus the real actual height of the building. Now, regarding permitting, there is currently no public engagement during the BPHC licensing process for a life sciences lab, none. There is more public engagement when an applicant wants to get a liquor license than there is to open a lab in the city of Boston. This includes both the initial application as well as any annual license renewal. We recognize that each applicant is required to form an individual institutional biosafety committee that was discussed earlier, And we also acknowledge that on that committee are 2 non-affiliated neighborhood residents. So that's a positive. But to be clear, there is no consistent communication method for anybody in the public to know about these biosafety committees, when the meetings are scheduled, and where minutes are stored and available. They're all left to the individual institutions, and each one does it differently. There's also no transparency to any lab where BPHC has identified operational issues that were discussed earlier during either public inspection, periodic inspections, when labs self-report on safety violations, or if in fact any ever had a suspended license. So the amount of transparency that exists in the entire licensing and permitting process really needs to be uplifted. We would advocate primarily, well, first and foremost, they're going to need a budget to do this. The number of labs opening in the city is growing tenfold. I'm sure the BPHC doesn't have a tenfold increase in the portion of their budget that's associated with lab oversight and licensing. So clearly, that I would ask that City Council considers that. We also would like to see them completely revamp the license and inspection process and ensure it is transparent, robust, and continuous with regard to public engagement. So thank you, Councilor Flynn, for the time.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you for the message that you provided for the residents of Fort Point. If anyone wants to raise their hand, we can call on you from the public, or Kerry or Juan. Are there anyone else in the waiting room that wants to be let in for public testimony? Matt Kay.
Hi. I just want to add a more pointed question to what Tom said. A few days ago, the BPDA voted to recommend 69A Street, which was mentioned earlier in the meeting. 69A Street is across an alley from 45 West 3rd Street. The local neighborhood association, I'm a board member of the West Broadway Neighborhood Association, and the local association recommended against this. A number of the people actually most of the people in the public hearing also were opposed to this. So, this is a conversion of an existing office space that was recently completed. They're proposing 2 stacks on top. They're proposing to consume most of the roof for mechanicals. And our building is, across a single lane from this. Yet it went forward. So all the things that have been said about paying attention to the neighborhood and noise and so on. We have this very recent example of the BPDA going forward. And I guess the question is, so what now? Is this something that you would be looking at? Should these buildings actually be right next to residential buildings? And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Matt. I see Sarah. Sarah has her hand up. Sarah, do you want to speak?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Flynn. My name is Sarah McCammond. I am a resident of Fort Point, and I just wanted to respond to a couple of things that were mentioned earlier. I was very encouraged to hear from the BPDA, from Michael Christopher, and from Lauren Shirtliff. And I apologize, Lauren, if I'm mispronouncing your last name, about the attention to labs and mechanicals. We have a project that is in development. It has not been constructed yet for life sciences. And it is a project that is already 25 feet over zoning in terms of height with 50-foot mechanicals. And so would very much like to work with both Michael and Lauren. The community has been advocating, and Councillor Flynn, I know you have as well, on our behalf, and to reduce those mechanicals and to work out a system where some of those mechanicals can be absorbed within the building, or the actual what Tom had talked about, the actual floor height to being readjusted. And I'd also like to point out on a conversion in the neighborhood on Congress Street, it was an office building, hasn't been built yet. They made the decision they wanted to convert to life sciences. And in order to accommodate the mechanicals, they took a floor off of their height. So it's not unprecedented to have something like that occur. So we would just very much like to work with the neighborhood, and just to reinforce the earlier comments about being so close to residential and with no public process. We have neighbors who share a wall with a life science building, and there was a conversion and were never notified until construction started. And thank you again to Councillor Flynn for making sure that a meeting was convened. But there is an absolute need for this process. I personally live in a building that is probably less than 50 feet from a building that is converting with life sciences with no public process. So these are, we value and enjoy being in a mixed use neighborhood that we are. We're in a neighborhood that is already zoned to allow for life sciences under the R&D zoning. And we're in a neighborhood that has new build for life sciences, and appreciate this hearing very much in order to create a process and a way that we can adapt and benefit from each other being side by side. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for your positive comments. If anyone else would like to raise their hand, I see.
Sure. We have Luann in the gallery. She won't be able to activate video, but we can take her testimony now. She unmutes.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Kerry. Luann, you're on mute, but you're up next.
Thank you, Counselor. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Luann.
Okay. I actually got on a little late, so please excuse me for that. My head is spinning with all of the knowledge that has been presented in the information today. I want to actually bring this back to quality of life issues within South Boston in its entirety. I have a lot of safety concerns regarding these labs. I've worked in Cambridge, Kendall Square to be exact, for 20 years. I watched them build Binney Street. And as some of the panelists have stated, they're looking at the community around Binney Street and Kendall Square was created via restaurants, a lot of commercial, and that sounds wonderful. However, what it also did in its development was to push the neighborhood further and further back as it engulfed more square footage in Kendall Square. It also extended down to Central Square. So it's a very slippery slope that we're on. We're talking about, I'm hearing, bringing people in, building more housing. I'm not hearing a lot about the existing South Boston community as we all live and know it currently. I'm hearing a lot about taxes. How is that going to impact our property taxes? The nickname for the Red Line train going into Kendall is known as the Brain Train. That will also come into Broadway Station. How are we going to look at infrastructure so that we don't have accidents happening? It's just a lot to think about. I don't believe that life science, particularly levels 3 and 4, should be located in a dense area. I'm not particularly happy with 1 and 2 because of the experimentation on animals. If we remember correctly, the Coppersmith project, that particular lab was committing to a 1 and 2, and they went into detail as to what that entitled. What that engagement would be, even though there's a children's park directly across the street. So I really would like to see, before the BPDA engages or makes promises to this industry, I would like to see quite a few community engagements. I would like to see more information put forth. I would like to see raw conversation and answers for the community. And insofar as the level 4 in the South End, that lab was not wanted by the South End people. And at that particular point in time, there were specific elected officials that pushed that lab through against the community of the South End. So I just want to make note of that. Leon said that they publish safety reports and that it's once a year. I don't ever recall seeing a safety report or any report on that biolab. So I'd like to know where that's published, how the community can have access to it, insofar as what Tom stated. And so with the mechanicals and the building and the zoning and the licensing and permitting, I absolutely support everything that he said. So I think this is probably one of many conversations that need to be had. Public safety, insofar as health and commuting safety, all of that. It's everything that you stand for, Councillor Flynn, insofar as public safety, it's a big red flag. So I'd like to see more community engagement on this, and from all aspects, all neighborhood associations as well. As you know, Edison Plant up on L Street is also proposing biolab in their 209-foot building. So that's all I have for right now. I just really hope that the city council and our government, city government, listens to what South Boston is saying. I can only speak for South Boston because that's where I live. But I'd also like to see, are these labs being proposed in other areas of the city, such as West Roxbury, High Park, and what their take on it is as well. So that's all I have. Thank you for listening, and thank you for hosting this meeting.
Thank you, Luann, for your comments. And just a quick response, myself and Councilor Flaherty Councilor Wu, who's the chair too, but we do plan to have kind of an informative session in the community, maybe sometime in the fall, to provide more information to residents, background information to residents with the Q&A. Maybe we'll have one in South Boston and the South End. And I know Liz Braden would probably like to have one in Brighton. So we do want to engage with the residents, especially in the impacted neighborhood. So we do plan to have probably 2 or 3 of them in the fall. And something myself and Councilor Flaherty have advocated for is a fire presence and an EMS presence down at the South Boston waterfront is a critical part of this discussion as well. Having said that, I know Councilor Flaherty, you have a 12 o'clock. Do you want to offer your closing statements? And then if there are any remaining testimony, I can take the testimony.
Sure, just briefly, obviously, to thank you, obviously, for lead sponsoring and stepping in as chair, to Councilor Wu for convening, and for the panelists, as well as those that have offered public testimony, and want to pledge to continue to work together to address these issues. I think they're solvable problems. We recognize the benefit of the brain power and the talent in our institutions here in the city, that they're economic engines for Boston, and that in turn trickles out to the neighborhood. So we want to make sure that we can continue to sort of tap into that investment, that energy, and that success that said, our quality of life and quality of life issues are of paramount importance to you and I as councilors, but also to the council as a whole. So look forward to working with the BRA doing business as the BPDA to try to address solutions for these issues that we heard public testimony on. So thank you very much for convening and for handling the rest of the session.
Thank you, Councilor Flaherty. And Kerry or Juan, do we have any further public testimony in the from anybody?
Mr. Chair, I don't have anyone on my end.
Okay.
I don't see anyone.
Okay, excellent. Well, I want to say thank you to Kerry and to Juan from the City Council Central staff for assisting me with this hearing. I want to say thank you to Councilor Wu for chairing the meeting and my co-sponsor, Councilor Flaherty, as well. I want to say thank you to the city officials that testified in the first panel. Greatly appreciate you being here and continuing to that same dialogue and openness as we move forward. I also want to thank the panelists on the second panel from the life sciences industry, providing good background information to residents. And we also want to ask you if you will join us this fall in engaging the residents. Maybe in South Boston in the South End sometime in the fall, but also to keep encouraging you to know that Boston students want to be educated and trained in this field. It's critical. And as the city councilor that also represents a large immigrant community, communities of color, we want to make sure that access to the STEM program is available to everybody. I also represent the largest number of residents living in public housing as well. So I want to make sure my constituents know about life sciences. I want to make sure my constituents and students have access to these training programs, are educated on the STEM program. So again, I'm going to challenge the life sciences and mass bio to do more for Boston students so that they can compete with other students across the country for these jobs. Our Boston students need to be educated and trained on STEM. And then the third panel was a group of concerned residents across the city that testified. I also want to say thank you to them as well. This meeting at this time is closed, and we do expect to have a follow-up meeting maybe in the fall. Thank you, everybody, for being here.